Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the No Trade Clause podcast. My name's Anil. I'll be your host today. I'm joined here by Ali Shafiq, our other partner here at No Trade Clause. And we got the pleasure today of having back for the second time former general manager Ryan McDonough. Ryan, thanks for joining us today.
Anil, Ali, great to be with you guys. Great to be here in person doing this in Vegas, and great to see your faces without masks on. It feels like the NBA Summer League is finally back.
Yeah, we love it. We love it. Ryan, let's just jump right into it. First question for you. What's a GM's job or role here at Summer League during this time of year? What's typically on their to-do list? What does a typical day look like? What type of decisions are they trying to make at this time of year?
As usual, as an executive, Anil, you're trying to keep a bunch of balls in the air without letting any of them hit the ground. You obviously have Summer League going on and your team here on the floor. But if you're a top executive, a president or general manager, that's probably not your main focus at this point. Your main focus is making sure your NBA roster is ready for training camp next year. It's a normal offseason for the first time, and it seems like forever, but still, training camp's only a few months away. And so you want to finalize your roster in terms of player signings. Are there minimum contracts you still need to sign? Do you have exception space or traded player exceptions to use? And are you big game hunting? Do you have the ability to get in the mix on Kevin Durant with Brooklyn, with Donovan Mitchell with Utah? Do you have a package that would satisfy those teams? Are you interested in getting one of those guys? And that's something that I don't know if it'll get done here, gentlemen, but could take all summer. That's why in the NBA front office, there really is no offseason.
Yep, absolutely. Basketball never sleeps. So talk to us from our front office perspective. What happens when a player like Kevin Durant, who we know has 4 years under contract, makes a trade request? As a GM, what are your options and how do you navigate a situation like that?
One of the things that's so fascinating about KD's trade request, and I made this point a couple weeks ago when I was doing NBA TV down in Atlanta, is that he requested a trade before the extension he signed last offseason kicked in. So he signed it last August. We were doing NBA TV shows in late June. The extension technically, although it was already signed, doesn't start until July 1. So he requested a trade before it started. So that's something that if you listen to Adam Silver's comments at the Board of Governors yesterday, with a new collective bargaining agreement negotiation seemingly starting to get underway between the league and the Players Association, obviously business is great. We've seen packed houses here at Summer League. We've seen the contracts that players have signed. We've seen revenue coming into the system at all-time records. But the NBA and the owners in particular don't like it when a player has a contract with multiple years left on its deal, especially a contract that's recently been signed, and he requests a trade. So I don't know the solution to it, the perfect fix. My idea, which I've thrown up before, is if a player signs a max contract, he's not eligible to be traded until the last 2 years of his deal, until there are 2 years left in the deal. But that would have to be collectively bargained. I think that's something that the Players Association would push back against. But I think that would be the way, just to take it off the table. That way, if the player wants to get traded or if the team wants to trade him, really it's irrelevant until there are 2 years left on his deal.
Absolutely. And if we see something like that, there might be a concession that needs to be made on the player side. So landing spots, we touched on KD for a little bit, but we've reached kind of an impasse on where talks are going and negotiations are going when it comes to KD and potential landing spots. But what's the type of read that you're getting on the situation, and where do you see potential landing spots as the market has kind of maybe not squeezed a little bit, but we've reached an impasse for sure?
Yeah, I think I'm in the minority that I felt all along Kevin Durant's going to remain in Brooklyn as a net. I felt that the whole time because as a front office, as a former executive, when you have a player of that caliber and a team of that caliber, potentially, right? It's all on paper at this point. We'll see where Ben Simmons is mentally and physically. We'll see what version of Kyrie Irving Brooklyn gets after opting in for the 1 year on a player option. But if you look at the moves they've made this offseason, bringing in Royce O'Neal, re-signing Patty Mills, signing TJ Warren, this is a team that could contend for a championship. So I think if you're in the front office, you set a very high bar, an extremely high bar. In fact, maybe an impossibly high bar, and say if we get this kind of package, we will consider trading Kevin Durant. In reality, nobody can probably deliver that level of package, especially as we sit here in Las Vegas in the second week of July in free agency. I know you guys know the cap and CBA as well as anybody. For those who don't know, players who signed this offseason aren't eligible to be traded for the most part until December 15th or January 15th, depending on the contract. So that takes a significant part of the market out of play from a trade perspective. And then just from a value perspective, if you have one of the all-time great players and scorers in the history of our league. He's got 4 guaranteed contract years left. What is the price? It would be an unprecedented price and as far as what Brooklyn would ask for. And frankly, whatever Brooklyn had in mind initially, I think the price went up when Utah got what they got for Rudy Gobert.
Absolutely. And you touched on Donovan Mitchell. We recently received news that, the Utah Jazz are willing to listen to offers when it comes to Donovan Mitchell. How are you reading that market for DM, and where do you see potential landing spots?
Yeah, so I spoke earlier about it being a juggling act when you're in the front office. What Utah's front office, led by Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck, what they're trying to do now is rebuild the team seemingly on the fly, and we'll see what happens with Donovan, but also keeping Donovan happy, right? Because it's one thing to say we got at least draft picks and young players and assets for the future, and Donovan Mitchell says, wait a minute, I've been here for a while now. We've been in the playoffs 6 years in a row. We've advanced multiple times to the conference semifinals in the West. We've been one of the best teams in the league. I don't care about draft picks in 2027 or 2028. I want to win now. I'm in my prime. I want to win now. So that's the juggling act that Utah has in their front office. I think they probably had more turnover this offseason than any franchise in the league, starting with Danny Ainge coming in midseason. Then on the coaching side, Quinn Snyder did an excellent job for a number of years, is out. Will Hardy is in. So I think that's something that Utah has at least opened the door a crack. And that's the way I read it. I think just everybody interprets these things a little bit differently, but as a former executive, it said Utah is not saying absolutely not when teams call them and say, will you trade Donovan Mitchell? But I imagine what they are saying is the bar is sky high, and if you blow us away, we don't want to trade Donovan Mitchell. We've made some moves to gain more flexibility, get young players, get draft picks, and then be able to reset our team on the fly. However, the door's open just a crack if you want to blow us away with an offer for Donovan in his prime.
Absolutely. I think they're obligated to do their due diligence.
Yeah. So, Ryan, as we are having discussions about where players are going to go, if they're going to be traded, we wanted to talk a little bit about Deandre Ayton, a player that you're very familiar with, a player that you drafted #1 overall. I find his situation a little bit interesting here because the first 2 weeks of free agency, we didn't hear too much about Deandre Ayton. Now it's coming out that Indiana may offer, may either do a sign and trade or extend him an offer sheet. What's your read and take on this situation, and why do you think that it doesn't look like Phoenix is going to retain him, and where do you think he ultimately lands?
A lot of good questions, and there are a lot of layers to it. As you know, when you were helping me with NBA TV, we're looking at all the different angles of it for, the difficulties with base year compensation as far as a sign and trade, the Brooklyn Nets being hard capped as far as receiving a player in sign and trade. So there are a number of factors with Deandre Ayton going to Brooklyn, and then they've also made other roster moves, like re-signing Nick Claxton as well as the other moves we mentioned previously. So I don't think there's a direct fit, and that's where it gets more complicated, potentially. If Kevin Durant is theoretically on the market, it seems like he is, but is there a third team that Deandre Ayton could go to? The Suns get assets that are either come to them and then traded to Brooklyn, or just as part of a 3-team deal, just go directly to Brooklyn. I think those scenarios are there, but to your point, Anil, it's the second week of free agency. Money is dried up around the league outside of Indiana, and then San Antonio has some as well, but it doesn't seem like they're trying to use it to necessarily upgrade the team in the short term, in the Victor Wembanyama sweep says. I think for Indiana, they are, probably the leader as far as interest. They still do have Miles Turner, who has 1 year left in his deal, so I think they need to figure out what to do with him. You wouldn't want to bring in Ayton and then move Turner to a backup role, especially approaching free agency. So there are a lot of layers to it. And then if you're in the Suns front office, you really want this thing just to kind of continue to drag on, to slow down, to hang in there with Kevin Durant, to maybe see what Brooklyn wants. Maybe Brooklyn's asking price comes down a little bit. However, but that's not what's in the best interest of Deandre Ayton and his representatives. They want a deal today. One other thing to keep in mind that I know you guys know, but for your viewers and listeners, since he was the #1 pick, his qualifying offer is extremely high. It's $16.4 million, I believe. So usually, from an executive standpoint, a player who is approaching or is a restricted free agent saying, I'm going to sign the qualifying offer, usually it's a bit of an empty threat because they're leaving so much money on the table. This case, the difference between $16.4 million and Ayton's max, right around 30, it's significant in 1 year. But as you guys know, there are a lot more teams with cap space next year. He's going to be 24 years old next year. If he's unrestricted and has a good year, even a decent year this year, with all the teams with money in the marketplace, I think he could be sitting pretty next year. So that's something the Suns don't want, but I think that is a real option for Ayton and his group if they don't get an offer they want, either from Indiana, from the Suns, or somebody else via sign and trade.
Absolutely. He stayed healthy as well. So, we talked about Ayton, but let's transition into Gobert in Minnesota. Talk to us about a team why Minnesota would make the move that they did, and is there how did you feel about that trade, and were there any pros and cons to moving all your chips in to move forward to make the move for Rudy?
Yeah, I think it's a very aggressive and somewhat risky move by the Timberwolves.
Yeah.
They took a big step last year. You guys know the history of the franchise over the last few decades. They haven't had a whole lot of success in a very difficult Western Conference. And so with an opportunity after beating the Clippers in the play-in, pushing Memphis in the first round of the playoffs, they wanted to upgrade their team. Obviously not considered to be necessarily a destination market. It's somewhere where free agents choose. But they have a talented team led by Anthony Edwards, who I think is going to be a superstar in the backcourt. Karl Anthony Towns, one of the most talented, maybe the most talented offensive big man in the league with a shooting ability, pick and pop. So I think from their perspective, it was the best player they can get is Rudy Gobert. It's probably not a perfect fit, but their thought process, the more I've thought about and talked to people about it, was they'll always have an elite big man on the court for 48 minutes. They're different, obviously, Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. Those guys will play together, I imagine, to start and end the games with Towns at the 4. And then I think the bet they're making, the more I thought about it, is Towns will struggle to guard some stretch fours, some good driving fours on the perimeter. I think that's just going to happen. But he has the best rim protector in the league, the insurance ball. So if he gets beat off the dribble, there's no better guy to have at the rim, blocking shots, doing verticality, rebounding than Rudy Gobert. So I think that was Minnesota's thought process, and the bet, which is it's a big gamble. Their bet is the 4 first-round picks they gave up will be in the 20s because they'll be one of the best 10 teams in the league for the next 5 years.
Yep.
So, Ryan, we've seen a bunch of offseason moves on both the East and the West. We wanted to get your take. Which teams do you think are most positioned to be favorites next season in both the East and the West? Some of the major moves, just to bring it back to the forefront, we saw DeJounte Murray go to Atlanta. We saw Jalen Brunson go sign with the Knicks. We saw Rudy Gobert obviously move to Minnesota. We saw Christian Wood sign with Dallas. We saw James Harden restructure his contract with Philadelphia. Any of these moves or any of the other moves that maybe I didn't mention come to mind when thinking about who's going to be the favorites in both conferences?
Yeah, for me, it's one team you didn't mention. I think it's quietly flown under the radar and really made a lot of nice transactions. The LA Clippers. Yeah. I think bringing back Kawhi Leonard, bringing back Paul George healthy, bringing in John Wall. They made the trade in season for Norman Powell and Robert Covington. That group is loaded. If you look at the talent on the roster, obviously, as we know, we were sitting here this time last year, and the preseason Vegas favorites were the Brooklyn Nets and the LA Lakers. Neither one of those worked out that well, so it's got to work together on the court. But I think one of the things that people forget, because he's missed a lot of time recently, is just how good Kawhi Leonard is when he's healthy. They've done an excellent job. Lawrence Frank and his staff have surrounded him with talent and depth. They have maybe the best young coach in the league in Tyronn Lue. That's a really good team. So I like them in the West. And then in the East, I think the Celtics. I mean, what they did this year, loading up Danilo Gallinari coming in, Malcolm Brogdon, I thought was a perfect fit. This is a team that was up 2-1 in the NBA Finals. They were leading Game 4 at home with 5 minutes left. Game 4 didn't go well, and then the series got away from them. Warriors are obviously the dynasty at this point with 4 championships in 8 years. Won the series in 6, but Boston with a young team was right there. And so for me, adding to the core of your team without really giving up anything. They didn't really touch the core of that team. One of the things that surprised me a little bit in the finals was I thought Boston would win the series because I thought they'd have a bench advantage in the finals. I thought Golden State's bench, led by Gary Payton II, is obviously now with Portland, and Jordan Poole outplayed the Celtics bench, especially in Game 6, but really throughout the series. So bringing in Brogdon, bringing in Gallinari, you look at the Celtics' 8 or 9 man rotation, it's pretty deep and good, especially defensively. There aren't many holes, and now I think they have the ability to overcome injuries, foul trouble. They have more ball handling with Brogdon. They have more shooting with Gallinari. I think Boston's the favorite in the East.
Absolutely. Let's touch on Collin Sexton. We haven't seen much of a market up until now, but it's starting to be rumored that Miami and Utah might be interested in a signing trade for him. What do you think of those fits? And then why hasn't there much of been a market for him? I mean, this is a guy who 2 years ago was averaging 24 on 60% true shooting.
The injury, to simplify it, the injury.
Absolutely.
It's one of the things that's I've been affiliated with the NBA for almost 2 decades now. It's so consistent, and I think it's human nature. Even if you see a guy working out, everybody around him, his agent, his trainer, the team doctors tell you, yeah, he looks good, he's healthy. Until you see him out there on the hardwood going up and down 94 feet, especially with some contact, even just a little bit of contact. How does he move? How does he slide? Is he confident in planting and jumping and turning directions? When he takes a charge or goes up for a block, is he confident in that? Has he cleared the mental aspect of it as well? And that's why it's so difficult for Collin Sexton. Obviously, Miles Bridges' situation is a little bit different. But with Collin, the market has moved. There's not much cap space left. And he may be a guy, I know he and his representatives don't want to hear this, better signing the qualifying offer and just playing the year out next year because, as we discussed, there are more teams projected to have cap space. He's a talented young player, but coming off an injury, yes, especially a significant injury, your market is depressed. And so with all those factors, the more time that goes by and the less money is available in the marketplace, it may be in his best interest just to sign the one-year qualifying offer. Because if you're a team thinking about acquiring Collin, if you're Utah or Miami or whoever, you're saying, well, who are we bidding against at this point? And what would we give up a ton of value, keeping in mind he is a restricted free agent, so you probably have to not only pay him a decent amount, but in a sign and trade, give something up. Is that worth it for Collin Sexton? With the injury factored in, I think that's why the market's a little bit stagnant for him. And that's why I think, as we sit here the second week in July, the guys we're talking about in free agents are restricted. Deandre Ayton, Collin Sexton, and then Miles Bridges, who has obviously a whole other list of factors as well.
Yeah, Ron, I think you bring up a great and very interesting point about potentially playing under the qualifying offer, especially after a season where you were injured, you didn't get to display all your talents and skills, restore some of that value, and then get a new contract. A player that I wanted to ask you a question about is a player that never has to restore his value. It's a player that we haven't heard too much about in the last few weeks, but I think that the media attention is going to shift a little bit. Next month, LeBron James becomes extension eligible. He can sign for 2 additional seasons. Do you think, like, he's going into the final year of his contract with the Lakers? Do you expect him to sign an extension? Do you think he just plays the season out?
Very interesting question, and I had to think about that because I don't know the answer to it. I'm guessing, the more I think about it, the way LeBron James has operated throughout the course of his career, I wouldn't be surprised if he waited and tried to use that leverage and that pressure on Rob Pelinka and the Lakers, for Jeannie Buss and Lakers front office to bring in Kyrie Irving. If he waited and say, okay, if you guys bring in Kyrie, I get the pen and I'm ready to go. So that's an interesting balance. I mean, the Lakers obviously had a lot of restrictions this offseason with the payroll being sky high. Their top 3 guys, as we know, Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, in terms of their salary and the place in the roster. We looked at it in free agency. They really didn't have many tradable contracts. I mean, Taylor Horton Tucker's value's down. Kendrick Nunn, another guy who played 0 games last year. It's almost impossible to trade a player like that other than a salary filler in a deal. So I bring that up because the Lakers, made some smaller moves. I like what they've done as far as going younger. We'll see how Lonnie Walker and Troy Brown Jr. and some of these guys work out, but at least they have guys with some theoretical upside and the potential to get better. Last year, I thought, bringing in all those veteran guys, you need role players, you need guys to set screens and defend and rebound and do the dirty work. Those future Hall of Famers in the mid-30s weren't able to do that. So I think they did some of the right things given their very limited resources, but specifically to LeBron, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he says, I'm open to it, but I want to see how the rest of the offseason goes before I make my decision.
I think that's a great point. It's all about leverage, and who knows? Maybe if we see a Kyrie Irving land in LA, maybe it's followed by LeBron signing an extension. We'll get you out on this last question here. We want to ask you about the CBA. So obviously, the CBA can be terminated if either side opts out this season. Otherwise, it'll expire after the following season. What are some of the major factors or discussion points that you think will center around this new CBA, either from the owner's side or and the team side, or on the player side? What are the important discussion points?
So from my perspective, I'd be shocked if either side opts out prematurely, just because business is going so well. I mean, you look at the money the players are making. I think a lot of the thought process behind trying to play in Orlando in 2020 and get to the bubble was to keep the business going, keep it flowing. Obviously, it took a hit, as every business in the country and the world did really during COVID, but they did a nice job stabilizing, and then the league's been on an upward trajectory since then. The TV ratings are back, money is flowing in, all revenues are at an all-time high, so I think everybody wants to keep a good thing going. From my experience, usually if you put all the issues up on the screen together, money is the overwhelming one, like the split of the pie, that, you know, the 50-50, 51-49 split. However, I think some of the issues beyond that, which are topical, are you know, players demanding trades early in their contract, shortly after signing an extension. I think what Ben Simmons did last year, you know, whether the issues physically, mentally were legit or embellished or a little bit of both, I think that's certainly a discussion point that the league wants. Obviously, the focus to be on the players, the teams, and games, not this, you know, sideshow circus with, if you go back to last offseason, most of the talk was about Ben Simmons and Kyrie Irving getting vaccinated and all the, you know, would he be able to play in Brooklyn? They want it to be in basketball teams and players. So I think trying to figure out those issues, especially as the next CBA, from everything I'm hearing, the media rights deals will go up again, which means given the split, player contract values will go up again. So yeah, I think over the next 5 years, guys, you'll see individual player salaries in 1 year start to approach $100 million, wow, which is insane. So if that is the case, you know, how do owners and front offices have some semblance of control? Because obviously what nobody on the league or team side wants, other than the players, is for a guy to sign a deal, you know, worth $75 million a year, and then right after he signs it or shortly after says, now I want to be traded. That's not good for business, and that's something the league, I think, will fight for in the new CBA.
Awesome. Ryan, thanks again for taking the time out. We appreciate it as always. It's always a pleasure to hear your perspective based on your experiences and your relationships. It's always great insight. So thank you for taking the time out. Hope you enjoy the rest of Summer League. And for everyone tuning in, thank you guys for joining us for another episode of the No Trade Clause podcast.